To this region, I came very early actually in my life because when I grew up in a very rural region in Austria, there were some migrants from Turkey there and refugees, and somehow these people were not treated well by many Austrians because there was a lot of racism, and I became friends with some of them. And I figured out that many of them were actually Kurds and not Turks, and they told me a lot about their situation in Kurdistan. So I became interested in the Kurds, and on the same time, later on I realized that there are also Kurds here in Syria and in Iraq and in Iran. And I started also to learn Arabic because I was not only interested in the Kurds, also in the whole Middle East region, and I started also to travel to Egypt, to Sudan later on during my studies. So, and Syria but in particular became very interesting for me during my first journey to Syria as a student in 1999. And actually back then I also visited this region, Hasaka and Kamishli. And later on I got to know some political immigrants in Austria, mainly Kurds who fled the Syrian regime, and I supported them in their work for human rights and for political change here. And at this time I did not dare to come back because of this support for the refugees. But after the Syrian army withdrew from that region, in January 2013, I came back, and actually Amude, where your studio is, was the first town I entered Syria again from the Turkish side. We came through the border. Back then it was possible to go in the night because there was no border wall. It's true that I'm focused on the Kurdish case, but in general I'm interested in marginalized minorities. So my interest on the Kurds was because they were oppressed for so many years in the countries where they lived. And now, of course, the situation here is different, but I'm equally interested in, let's say, the minorities of the minorities. So I did a lot of research about the Yazidis as well, for example. I wrote a book about Shingal in Iraq and the genocide against the Yazidis there. And I think one of the questions I'm very much interested here in the region is also how it works to organize such a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society like here. One thing really even Austria could take this region as an example is the way how it deals with multilingualism. So you see everywhere at least 3 languages with everywhere where you see public inscriptions. You see Arabic, Kurdish, and Syriac, Aramaic, however you call it. This is something you would not see in any bilingual region in Austria, for example. So this is something I really appreciate. But of course, there are also a lot of problems here in the region. I never painted the rosy picture of the revolutionary paradise here. But it would also surprise me if under such conditions of war and economic blockade, now also the water blockade from the Turkish side, such a paradise would be possible. And I think there is still a lack of democracy here. If I see, for example, what happened here last Friday in Kamishli, there are still some shortcomings here, but in general, I think the region is way better than any other region in Syria, and this is why I always defended that region also, because this is the only place where you can also criticize such things and where you have at least some kind of political pluralism and the will to organize the society, some kind of pluralistic society, where religious and linguistic and ethnic pluralism is appreciated and not seen as a danger for the society. But I still think that of course, there are a lot of problems, and the main problem here is that it's a very precarious peace. And I mean, you had in 2018 the Turkish invasion in Afrin. You had in 2019 the invasion on Tal Abyad and Serikaniye.
Yeah.
And what I hear from ordinary people here is just that people are afraid that any time anything could happen, and of course also the economic situation suffers under this uncertainty. But therefore, I think also some international involvement for the people of this region is necessary to change this situation and to give you at least a minimum of security here. Well, one of the things I'm trying is to connect you with the outside world, because I think one of the big problems here is really that that there's a lack of contact on all levels. There
Contact
is
between who?
Between the people here and Europe and the world, but also it's very difficult to do business with that region because there's only one border open to Iraq, and the border to Turkey is closed. It's very difficult to have some kind of intellectual and academic exchange because there are no really proper universities here. So I think, and I think the region doesn't get the attention it should get. You know, as long as there is not another attack on the region, you don't read anything in European newspapers about North and East Syria, because only a spectacular war is worth to write about. But the suffering under the water blockade now, for example, does not get the attention it should get. I mean, I came here this time for this water forum, and I think that this is one of the crucial questions at the moment also, because water is extremely important for any kind of life, also for our human kind of life. And it's not just a problem for this region, it's actually a problem for the whole east of Syria and the whole of Iraq. I think there are two main problems. First of all, that Turkey really uses the water as a weapon against this region. But there's a larger problem behind it as well, and this is the global climate change that is mainly caused also by Europeans and North Americans who destroy the nature of this planet. Especially regions that are geographically very close to the desert regions are the regions that are the first and the worst affected by this climate change. And the existing shortage of water here in the whole region is not just a problem of Mesopotamia, it's also a problem, for example, of the Nile Valley, where the conflicts between Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt are increasing in the last months. So I think besides the present political problem with Turkey, it's also some kind of global responsibility
in climate change.
Yeah, to stop this and to support these vulnerable regions, for example, in water management, because I see it also in Iraq. I'm working a lot about Iraq also, that the south of Iraq, for example, becomes just unlivable within the next 1 or 2 decades. And the middle class of Basra already buys houses and apartments in Suleymaniye, for example, because in summer you just can't live there anymore. I hope that this region can continue to exist as an alternative towards the other authoritarian systems you have in other parts of Syria. But I also hope that the region can democratize its system and can can be more inclusive than it is already, and that this region can also not just survive, but can be
Improve?
Can be accepted. At the end of the day, on a certain point, you need to have a deal with the existing regime of Syria
situation.
at the end of the day, and you need some legal legitimacy. Otherwise, this blockade will continue. So I hope that this region somehow can be a part of a different Syria, of a changed Syria. And I hope that especially the living conditions of the ordinary people here can improve in the next years. But of course, there's also always the fear that this region could be completely smashed either by Turkey or by the Syrian regime with the help of Iran or whomever, you know. So nobody knows and nobody can predict the future. I just can wish the best for the people in this region.
So you're gonna come here in the next year, or
I hope I can come here my whole life and can deepen the friendship with the people of this region.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to say any words to Arta FM?
Shukran jazilan. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to read 5 languages here in the studio, including Armenian, English, Kurdish, Arabic, and Syro-Aramaic. But Armenian is something you don't see very often here, and I really appreciate that as well. And thank you very much for inviting me too.